It almost killed me, and then it came after my children. It was sneaky though, and we really didn't know what it was until it had already hurt us. Our first reaction was utter denial. We didn't want to believe that it could actually be the source of our issues, and we didn't think we could live without it. Separating ourselves from it was intimidating and unnerving, so we ignored our own ills and justified them, prolonging our suffering. But eventually the abuse pushed us to the breaking point. We had to get rid of it. But it was everywhere, entwined in almost every aspect of our life, and embraced by all of our friends and family. They loved it, so much so it seemed even more important than us. They couldn't part with it, couldn't bear to be rid of it, and they challenged our pursuit for freedom. So we locked ourselves in and hid from it. Then, with a fierce determination, we forced it from our lives and our home. Gradually, our day-to-day norm changed. Pain transformed into peace. Frustration and tears turned to gratefulness. And from crippling anxiety arose confidence. We began to heal, physically, emotionally, and mentally. The change was unbelievable. But it was still out there, haunting us. At the grocery store, at family get-togethers, at the doctor's office, at birthday parties, at restaurants, at playgroups, and even at parks. No amount of preparation would be enough to avoid its eventual attack. It would get one of us, and the suffering would be even worse than it was before. Day and night, my son would cry in agonizing pain. His legs so hurt he refused to walk. He would become depressed and angry and lash out in an uncontrollable rage. Discipline was useless. His actions were not misbehavior, but impulsive and instinctive reactions to overwhelming stimuli flooding his compromised sensory system. That, combined with emotions so intense they frightened him. He was trapped in his own body. Relentless tapping and banging would soothe him, and humming repetitive melodies would calm his anxious mind. My daughter wouldn't sleep. Mysterious rashes would appear on various parts of her skin. Embarrassment and shame would plague her as she lost her ability to hold her bladder. She would have fits of emotional confusion, going back and forth in an angry and belligerent cycle, wanting the opposite of what she had just chosen seconds before. She would refuse to eat, complain of frequent stomach pains, have visible blood and mucus in her stools, and at her worst, vomit repeatedly till her tiny body collapsed in shock. My husband would go to bed early with a headache so intense nothing could touch the pain. He would awake in the morning feeling unrested and fatigued. His headache would return to torture him throughout the next day, accompanied by stomach discomfort and sinus congestion. Feeling sick combined with the stress of work was enough to shade his usual contented disposition, but when he returned home, the feeling of despair would drag him even farther down. There was no rest as he became caregiver to a disabled wife and unwell children. My bones would ache, radiating pain throughout all of my joints. I would steady myself with a cane until the disequilibrium was too much that I would have to crawl. The brain fog, so thick and disorienting, would keep me from realizing what was happening to my body, and I would collapse to the floor, completely weak and unable to move, and barely able to speak. Subtle muscle twitches in my arms and legs would gradually increase to full convulsions, causing my body to violently throw itself up and down, repeatedly slamming my head into the floor and forcing my flailing arms and legs into whatever furniture was nearby. Unable to form thoughts into words, my son or husband would be alerted by my feeble cries, and they would save me, just as they had done before. We would heal again. My son would return, my sweet, caring, soft-hearted boy who loves his little sister more than anything in the world. He would help her eat her breakfast, not caring if either his food or hers touched the skin of his hands, and he wouldn't be bothered if the food broke or fell onto the floor. He would recognize when she was sad and would feel with her and offer her a hug. He would speak politely with manners and was easily corrected. He would serve his timeouts with stubbornness but not violence. He would ask why and say, "But Mom," yet he wouldn't obsess over what he couldn't control. He would play with his toys and his imagination instead of wandering the house aimlessly lost in his own mind. He could draw creatively and write spontaneously. He would engage with others in conversation instead of just talking at them. He'd still run about with boundless energy, but he'd be able to sit still for a story and quiet down for a movie. My daughter would transform into the silliest and most lovable little sweet pea. Her skin would glow without any redness or irritation, and the dark circles under her big blue eyes would be no longer. She would engage completely in her imagination, becoming a princess or a cat and convincing her brother to play along too. She would let him change the rules and would willingly share her toys. Without a suggestion, she would shout out that she has to go potty and then would run to the toilet all on her own. She would eat again, and she would sleep again, lying down without a fight and comfortably snoozing all night. My husband would smile again, with his genuine, soulful smile that emits a deep, all-knowing joy so moving that you could not grin back. He would play and joke and fill our home with laughter and delight. His head, free of pain, wouldn't be hampered with thoughts of negativity and hopelessness. With uninhibited creativity, he'd invent recipes with unique and unusual flavors that would satisfy our bellies. He would be able to breathe deeply, filling his lungs with air and letting it out with a peaceful sigh. I would be able to use my legs again, which would give me the freedom to shower, tend to everyday tasks, and play with my kids. My body would feel resilient and my mind would feel revitalized. My chores wouldn't seem so daunting, and my cooking and baking would become my creative outlet instead of a burden. I would smile more and be silly more, letting go of the stress and worry. For a moment, I would feel pure bliss with my wonderful family and forget that it exists. Life is hard without it, but not as hard as life is with it. We hate it. It hurts us. It scares us. It scars us. It is confusing, though. It deceives many. It is not always the same. It can be good for some, and it doesn't hurt everybody. And those it does hurt are usually ensnared by its attractiveness. They crave it, and their desire for it blinds them from its ill effects. It steals peace. It steals joy. It steals life. Yet it doesn't seem like the likely culprit of occasional discomforts, fatigue, infections, let alone behavioral and mental disorders, agonizing pain, disabling conditions, or even death. Many times its abuse is subtle. It slowly takes advantage of its victim. It causes numerous, seemingly unconnected issues, many that are so common that they are attributed to other causes. These issues can be ignored for a while, or reduced with simple, inexpensive treatments, but eventually these issues add up and take over, making it, which is a likely cause, even more difficult to recognize. But once you've seen it for what it really is, you will understand why we are so adamant about keeping it away, and we want you to investigate and see if it is hiding in your life. We want to expose it. If it cannot hide, it cannot unknowingly hurt. It hides behind unawareness. It hides behind ignorance. It hides behind opposition. It hides behind closed-mindedness. It injures without an understood cause. It strikes without bias. It can be seemingly invisible, yet a minute amount can be lethal. It can be many things, or it can be just one thing. It can be new, or it could have been around for a long while. It can be enjoyable, it can be desirable, it can be addictable, it is generally acceptable, it is commonly recommendable, and is typically overlooked. Because people think it isn't real. Because people can't believe it could do harm. Because people feel so strongly attached to it. Because people don't know how to do life without it. But no matter what you think, or what you believe, or how you feel, or what you know, it could be hurting you. It could be hurting your children. And it can only be stopped by you.